Welcome to the Unstoppable Freedom Podcast. I'm Jimmy Page. Today, I wanted to do a special podcast to talk specifically about one of the core roots of freedom, and that root is educational freedom. If freedom is to survive, if the whole American idea is to make it, and there's a lot of people that wonder if it will, and there's a whole lot of people that really want it to make it. There's millions of us that believe in it. If the American idea is to make it, this grand experiment of self-rule, where rights come from God, not government, where individual liberties are unalienable, and the government's limited role is primarily to protect those rights. I mean, that's why we have the government in place, to protect individual rights that are given by God. In fact, this is the only nation that has been organized this way, recognizing that rights come from God. The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and actually also property ownership. Things like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to assemble peacefully, the Second Amendment, and on it goes, as detailed in not only the Declaration of Independence, but also the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and where every citizen is responsible for being informed and taking an active role in maintaining our culture. So many of us have abdicated that in our complacency. We've given up this idea that we have a responsibility to be actively engaged in our government, in the process, and in maintaining our culture. If we're going to truly live out our motto of e pluribus unum, out of many one, then there's probably nothing more important right now than education. Some people might argue the family, and I would probably make that argument. Others might argue faith, and I would make that argument as well. But the educational system has so much leverage. It's so powerful right now because every single kid is in the educational system. So there's a ton of power here, right? That's why I'm going to take the next couple podcasts to lay out exactly what is happening in our schools and to give you real options. So if you're a parent and you've got kids in school, I want to give you some things that you can do right now to protect your kids and make sure that you make the best decision for their education. And you know what? If you don't have kids in the educational system right now, you still can make a huge impact because your voice as a taxpayer, as a citizen, needs to be heard. So education, let's start here. Education is the root of freedom. That's why what our kids are being taught matters so much. The future of freedom is 100% going to be decided by what happens in our schools. The communists know this. The Marxists know this. And that's why they've spent the last 50 years literally, step by step, transforming our educational system from one that teaches critical thinking and reasoning skills, which teaches the classics so that we can learn from history, which teaches values and virtues, the common values and virtues that we ascribe to as Americans. That e pluribus unum is important because no matter where we've come from, whether it's from Europe or from countries like Ireland or England or Italy, or whether it's from south of the border, from Mexico or Cuba or other countries all around the world, doesn't matter where people come from, because the understanding is they're coming to a new place, America, where they assimilate into this culture where we have common values, common ideals, common culture. And that's the beauty of why America can work. And it's the beauty of why diversity matters, because when we come together around those core values that unite us as Americans and we seek unity and not division, that's when we're most powerful. So the communists, the Marxists know this. And that's why they spent the last 50 years transforming our educational system into what I would call indoctrination centers. That's why you'll hear us and so many other people in this movement towards freedom saying we want education, not indoctrination. They know that kids, the younger they are, the more impressionable they are, the more willing they will be to accept whatever you suggest to them, especially when they're 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. But for me, The reason that this has become front and center issue is this. COVID exposed what was going on in our classrooms to tens of millions of parents, tens of millions of us, maybe 100 million parents. And it's safe to say that we are absolutely appalled at what we've seen. And at the very beginning, I remember, part of my story was experiencing remote learning with my daughter, who at the time was a senior in high school. She was engaged, following the lockdowns and the school closings and all of that. She chose to continue with remote learning when they made it an option. And I was down in the basement getting a workout in, and she came down the stairs. She was bebopping down, and she said, "Hey, I'm in class." And I said, "Oh, hey, is it muted? I don't want to say something where the class can hear." And she said, no, but why don't you sit in on the class with me? So I paused my workout, and I remember watching and listening in as she was on her Zoom call. And what I discovered was appalling. The politicization, where politics entered the conversation, where people with different political views were ostracized, where anyone with different facts from the main narrative at that time, they were immediately isolated, ridiculed. There was a free-for-all, a frenzy. But what surprised me most was that it began with the teacher. The teacher actually was the one leading the charge by calling my daughter names. "Oh, you must listen to Fox News. Oh, you must be a Trumpy," et cetera, et cetera. And all these accusations were coming from the teacher. And neither of those things was true. She just lives in my house, and we talk about these topics regularly to try and get to the truth. So after that experience, I knew that what was actually happening in the schools was very different than what I thought was happening in the schools. Since then, of course, we have uncovered so much more what I would consider bad news, bad environment, bad culture, bad teaching, things that we would never be okay with. And now all those things are being exposed. What we know is happening is bad, but what we don't know is worse. There is so much stuff happening behind the scenes, silently, secretively. What is being hidden from us would wake you up at an entirely different level. Now, the good news is we've exposed a lot of this stuff. We've exposed a lot of this through social media. There are many, many freedom fighters out there working to expose what's happening in our school system so good parents can make better decisions. Most of us, hardworking people who love God, love family, love country, can't conceive of or get our head around the fact that an entire educational system is now one giant indoctrination center. And I've heard over and over, well, that can't be happening at my school. I live in this area where it's more conservative. This would never happen here. Well, the truth is it's happening everywhere. And it stands in direct opposition to most of our values and beliefs. For people who love God, family, and country, who care about their kids, who are working hard, who are kind of the backbone of America, it stands in direct opposition to most of what you value and believe. And truthfully, we can't imagine how we got to this place. How did we get to this place where what's happening in our schools is what I would call, and what a lot of our former military personnel will call, a psychological operation specifically meant to destroy our love of country, our family structure, our cultural norms and morality, and truth itself. We are seeing all of this dismantled. And by the way, some people will say this is an experiment. I just want to let you know, this is not an experiment. This is a tried and true Marxist or even communist assault on everything that we believe. Let me repeat that. This is not an experiment. This is a direct attack on American freedom, the American family, and all of our values that we stand for. Things like hard work, things like equal opportunity, things like the rights that we've been given by God. This movement in our schools is a psychological op designed to undermine all of the things that we value and hold dear. It's designed, and I'm going to be more specific about this, It's designed to turn our kids into leftist, social justice activists. It's no different, and I want you to hear this. It's no different than the indoctrination that happened in Nazi Germany. It's no different than the indoctrination that happens every day in China and Russia. It's no different. Now, does that mean that there aren't really good teachers in the schools? Of course not. There are. There are thousands and thousands of teachers that are staying in their roles in the schools to fight back, to bring their values, to bring their faith, to bring a love of God, a love of America, and a value for the family, and make sure that that's represented in the schools. But to be truthful, they are becoming fewer and farther between. Many of them are exhausted by what's happening, and they're leaving their jobs because they can't function in that environment. Many times as a person of faith, as a Christian, it's very hard to function as a Christian and be a teacher. We just heard of a teacher in California. Her name is Jessica Tapia. Jessica was fired for her religious beliefs. And here's why. Just to come to grips with this. She refused to keep secrets from parents regarding a student's gender identity. She believes that kids do not have a right to privacy from their parents, that the parent is still the authority in that home to make decisions, and they should be aware of the decisions that are happening at school. And she refused to lie to parents. She refused to keep secrets from parents regarding their students' gender identity. Her religious belief that underscores that is that she believes that God made male and female, that he's made men and women, two genders. That belief is no longer compatible or congruent with the educational system in America. And that's not only in public schools, that's also in many of the private schools and independent schools who are also buying into this Marxist indoctrination, this curriculum. The second thing that she refused to do, she refused to allow transgendered females who are biological males into the female locker room. She felt like that put the girls at risk, and she was unwilling to allow that to happen while she was in the school. That was another reason that she got fired. Well, of course, now that's going to end up in the courts because this is a matter of religious freedom, of course, right? This is a matter of someone not having to suspend their faith the moment they step on a campus. That is not required. So her exercising her values and beliefs and her faith on that campus is protected under the Constitution. So we're going to see this happen in real time. This lawsuit is happening in California as we speak. But you have to come to grips with the reality of what's happening in your classroom. If you've got kids especially, or you've got grandkids, you have to come to grips with this. At the same time that this psychological operation is destroying our historical foundations of freedom, our faith, in other words, it's anti-America. It's absolutely anti-American. It is demonizing our history, demonizing our founders, demonizing everything that this nation has been founded on. It's also destroying our faith community. It's producing people that don't believe in God because they want them to believe in science. And I don't believe that, by the way, that faith and science are separate. In fact, they fit hand in glove. It's a beautiful thing because God, who created science, his character is very consistent with science, right? Faith and science actually fit very well together. But it's also destroying not only the historical foundations of freedom and also of our faith and also our families, what we would consider traditional biblical families, but it's also stealing our kids' innocence. It's creating an environment that grooms them for sexual exploitation, and it divides us all by our victim status or by our race, by our ethnicity, by our gender. That is what's happening in our schools today. So let's talk about a couple of things that I think we can all agree on as we get rolling with the specifics of what's happening and with the things that you can do about it. Let's talk about a couple of things that I think we all agree on. Number one, no one loves our kids more than we do as parents. And no one knows them better than us. I don't care. I love and respect teachers, but they do not love my kids the same way I do. It is a very unique, as a parent, it's very unique how much you love your kid. In fact, before you have a child, you can't imagine how much you're going to love that child. And then you think when you have a second child, if you're blessed with a second child, you're thinking, how will I have enough love to love my second child as much as I love my first child? And yet somehow you do. You love them all with that same abundance of love. But one thing I think we can agree on is no one loves our kids more than we do as parents. And no one knows them better. No one knows what's best for them better than us. There is not a teacher alive that's going to love my kids like I do. Never. And part of the proof of that is that I'm willing to die for my kids. And trust me, there's not a single other person on the planet other than my wife who's probably willing to say that. The other thing about this, if you know anything about mama bears, right? If you want to see the love of an adult for a child, love of a mom or a dad for a child, all you have to do is look at mama bears. If you've ever wondered if this was true, get between a mama bear and her cubs, and you will find out very, very quickly that love is a special love. That love is a fierce love. That love is a protective love. And it's unrivaled by anyone else other than a mother and a father. The second thing I think we can agree on, I'm pretty sure, is that we are not co-parenting our kids with teachers or schools or counselors or anyone else. We are not co-parenting. Our rights and responsibilities for our kids do not stop when they step on the campus. Our rights and responsibilities do not stop when they step on the campus. In fact, we as parents are the primary educators of our children. That is our primary responsibility. One of the core things that we're responsible for is raising our kids and educating them. Of course, another one is to pass on our faith and our values and our virtues. But make no mistake, we are the primary educators of our children. That's our responsibility. That's not the government's responsibility. In fact, nowhere in the Constitution is there a federal mandate for education. All of that is left up to the states and local levels to decide. And really, ultimately, it's left up to each individual mom and dad to decide how to best educate their kids. We have, I believe, and I think you'll agree with this, we have a sacred responsibility and duty to raise and educate our kids in a manner that honors God, that values the family, that instills faith and character and virtue, and equips and prepares them to be productive and honorable citizens of the United States. We want to produce young men and women who in our home get everything that they need to function in the real world, to be competitive, to be successful, to live a life of meaning and purpose, and to be fulfilled, knowing that they're doing what God has made them to do, knowing that they have the skills and the DNA and the stuff inside of them, that hard work ethic, that sense of personal responsibility and accountability, the things that we don't value anymore, unfortunately, and are certainly not taught in our school system very often. That's our responsibility. And I think we can all agree on this. I think the third thing we can agree to is this. It is our duty as parents to do three things: protect our kids, mind, body, and spirit, protect, preserve their innocence, and three, prepare them to succeed in life. It's our duty as parents to protect them, preserve their innocence, and prepare them to succeed in life. Well, right now, in American schools, there are two wars happening, and you need to be aware of this if you're not already. There are two battlegrounds, two wars right now. The first one, there is a war for the heart, mind, and soul of our kids. There's no other way to say it than that. This is a battle between a Marxist, atheistic ideology and a freedom-loving, independent, faith-based ideology. That's the war. There is a war for the heart, mind, and soul of our kids. And the second war is this. The war is against parents and parental authority. there is a very real attempt at putting the state in place of the parents. And by the way, this happens in every single Marxist, socialist, communist country. They have to separate the kids from the parents and make the kids the property of the state. That is part of this war. So the sooner you realize that, the more you realize you have to step in and assert your parental rights and your parental authority as it pertains to your kids' education. Well, we had a guest on podcast number 23, if you want to go back to that. Her name was Deborah Flora, and she maps it all out in her incredible documentary entitled, Whose Children Are They? Again, it's podcast number 23. Deborah Flora was our guest. She's an incredible guest. She's an incredible person, and she is working so hard to expose all of this stuff that's happening on the inside of our schools, including this war against parents and parental authority. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about these wars and what's going on. And I'm sorry, you have to understand what's happening so that you can know what to do. So we're going to expose, part of what we do with this podcast is we're exposing what's happening so that you can see it, and then so that you can get the tools and resources necessary to do something about it. So here we go. The war on kids. The war on kids is literally coming from just about every conceivable angle. And I'm going to give you a taste of what's happening in our schools today. Number one, I'm going to give each one of these maybe one word. Number one, exposing. Our kids are exposed to explicit sexual material, including pornography as young as 5 years old, robbing them of their innocence. That, by the way, is very difficult to get back once it's lost. You know, and we entrust our kids. We send our kids to school thinking their innocence is not going to be robbed. They're not going to have access to material that could negatively affect the way they see things. It could damage their heart. That could damage their emotional state. And yet that's exactly what's happening. States and school districts, which are following what they call a comprehensive sex education program, are 100% robbing your kids of their innocence. Now, I can tell you, could a kid escape the school system without being exposed to this agenda of sexually explicit material, pornography, books that show every kind of inappropriate content you can imagine? Could they escape the school system without that exposure? Possibly. Unlikely, but possible. So let's start with exposing. They are literally exposing your children to inappropriate content and conversations. This is probably the bigger part of this. Inappropriate conversations about gender, sex, sexuality as early as kindergarten. These are often secret conversations, and kids are told not to tell their parents. If you were to read the material at a school board meeting, which many moms, many parents are doing, they will turn off your mic because it is that disgusting. They won't allow the obscenity and the explicit material to be spoken over the mic many times because it is that offensive. Now imagine that your kids are having access to that. That's this exposure. And they're telling your kids not to tell their parents about what they're being exposed to or the conversations they're having. We used to tell our kids early on, hey, if anyone tells you not to tell your parents, what you're to do immediately is go tell your parents. We told them it's not okay for an adult or anyone else to tell them to keep a secret from their parents. That generally means that whatever that conversation is probably not healthy, probably inappropriate. So that's what's happening. They're being exposed. They're also being groomed. Our schools are grooming our kids to be sexually exploited and abused later in life. They're grooming our kids to be sexually exploited by predators and abusers. Books and curriculum are often, as I already mentioned, pornographic and disturbing in any other setting. And sharing this content and having conversations between an adult in authority and a minor, 5 years old, 8 years old, 12 years old, whatever, 15 years old. In any other venue, those conversations would be, number one, inappropriate for sure, in many cases criminal. By taking away our kids' innocence early and creating mass gender confusion, mass sexual confusion, it's easier to abuse them later. And here's what I want to remind you. Grooming is a predatory act. It is maneuvering another individual in a position that makes them more isolated, dependent, likely to trust, and more vulnerable to abusive behavior. When conversations are happening between a trusted adult, like a teacher or counselor, and a young person, a young minor, this is setting them up. It's making them more vulnerable to abusive behavior later in life. And I got to tell you, it is an insidious predatory tactic. It's used by abusers, predators, sexual aggressors who target and manipulate vulnerable people for exploitation. Child grooming is the deliberate act of establishing an emotional bond with a child to lower the child's resistance. Child grooming can result in that minor falling victim to physical or sexual or even emotional abuse. Whenever someone in a position of authority uses that authority to create an emotional bond and manipulate and lower a child's resistance to that type of abusive behavior, that's a problem. And that's happening in our schools as a matter of curriculum because of what we're teaching and how we're teaching it. Okay, so they're exposing our kids to material. They're grooming them for future abuse. They're confusing them. Our schools are confusing our kids about gender by introducing preferred pronouns and making it popular to be transsexual or bisexual or non-binary. They confuse them about basic biology. You know, when you and I went to school, there was no question about basic biology, but now the science of biology, the facts of biology are being distorted, and you can choose to be anything you want. And by the way, you can even keep this from your parents, and we'll help you. But even though basic biology rejects this nonsense, it's happening to our kids as young as 4 years old. In fact, in some cases, even younger. Well, I want to tell you, I want to point you to a previous podcast. Podcast number 20 tells the story of Aaron and John Lee and how their daughter was targeted and taken advantage of in this way. And this is happening in our schools every day. And more parents are talking about it. More and more kids are exposing it as well. Okay, so we've talked about exposing, grooming. We've talked about confusing. None of those things feel like they belong in our educational system, but yet they're there. Okay, they're also destroying and dividing. Schools, under the cover of something called gender-affirming care, are literally giving your children the ability to permanently alter their physical body with child mutilation, including puberty blockers, secret conversations, and transition closets. This is happening. In fact, it's also a lot of times under the cover of state law. In Colorado, for example, they have a state law that allows parents and counselors and others, teachers and counselors and others to keep secrets from parents and to not inform parents who are not in agreement with this gender affirming care to keep these secret from their parents. That's what's happening. They're also dividing us and segregating us. They're segregating our children based on race. They're using a tool called critical race theory to do it. Critical race theory teaches them to see everything through the lens of color. They also teach that every single system and every single relational interaction is or has at its core racism. Every social interaction is racist. Our kids are taught to see color first and color always. And I can tell you the effect of that, of course, is that kids who never saw race and only saw other kids and only saw them for who they were and how they behaved and the content of their character and the friendships that they had, they're now seeing color first. They're teaching hatred and racism towards whites, and they're making white kids and Asians feel guilty and full of shame. And this is all, of course, under the umbrella of CRT and DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, I know some of you at this point are depressed. You're like, all of this is happening in our schools. Yes, they no longer teach critical thinking. Instead, they're teaching critical theory. And critical theory is designed to divide and destroy. And there's always oppressors and victims. Minorities are always the victims, and whites are always the oppressors. So you can imagine what's happening in these classrooms. Some people are feeling like victims. Other people are feeling guilt and shame because they're oppressors, even though they aren't oppressors. But with buzzwords like equity and inclusion infecting the schools, you can forget about excellence. You can absolutely forget about excellence. It is a race to the bottom, and it illuminates striving for excellence as the enemy. In fact, it ensures a lifetime of victimhood and failure. Equity is the enemy of excellence. Equity ensures failure. It doesn't allow anyone to excel. It doesn't judge anything based on merit. It dumbs everyone down to the lowest common denominator. We don't reward merit or excellence or achievement. In fact, many schools are eliminating, the class ranking system. They're eliminating AP classes. They're eliminating all of the things which help our kids to strive for their highest level of achievement. Equity ensures equal outcomes rather than equal opportunities. So if you want to know what's happening in our school, that's what's happening. And I think I'll end with this last piece, and by the way, every NFL team has an equal opportunity to win the Super Bowl, to use a sports illustration. What they do with that opportunity through hard work, sacrifice, teamwork, communication, all of those things are going to determine the outcomes. Equity is designed to make every single team finish the season with 8 wins and 8 losses, regardless of the commitment of their players, regardless of the coaches and staff, regardless of the talent they put on the field and how hard they work. They want everyone to have the same outcome, regardless of those things. Well, we believe that competition breeds excellence, where everyone is incentivized to work harder and get better. Every single boat rises when there's competition and incentive to do your very best. No one can argue that our educational system is failing in just about every single measurement that we care about. I mean, there's statistics out of the Baltimore city schools that not a single student in 23 schools meets the standard for math or reading. In Chicago schools, we're getting the same reports that in somewhere up to 50 schools, not a single student is meeting standard. Our schools are failing. I think perhaps most importantly, to close, is our schools are activating. So they're exposing, they're grooming, they're dividing, they're segregating, they're working through equity rather than equal opportunity, and they're activating our kids to become social justice warriors for whatever topic they want, whether it's climate change or gender ideology or you name it. To essentially war against America with the belief that we are irreparably flawed and evil, that everything about our history is evil and based on slavery instead of the truth that we are built on individual liberty and God-given rights and freedom, the pursuit of freedom. And they're also teaching our kids to dismiss their faith and our values and our morals, and everything as it relates to gender or marriage or family. That's the war on kids, and it's happening. We can no longer say, well, that would never happen in my kid's school. We know too much. We know that it is happening, and we need to do something about it, right? So let's end with a little bit of encouragement. Let's end with a little bit of encouragement. There's a lot that we can do about this. And there are organizations and movements that are sweeping the country that are involved in this fight, that are giving tools and resources, that are connecting parents with other like-minded parents who want to make sure that the educational system is safe for our kids, that want to make sure that their kids have an opportunity to fulfill their potential and become everything they're made to be. There are movements across this country, and that's why we bring them to light, so that we give you tools and resources and an avenue to engage in this fight, in this war against our kids, because nobody wants better for our kids than us. Nobody. So I want to encourage you. I'm just going to encourage you with a couple of takeaways. To number one, get involved and fight. Get involved and fight. What can we do? Well, you can get engaged. You can get involved and fight. And the simplest thing that I would encourage you to do is join or start a Moms for Liberty group. I had one of their founders, Tiffany Justice, on the podcast number 19. You need to listen to that episode. And they are organizing parents to show up at board meetings, contest the books and pornographic and sexually explicit materials that are available to their kids, and even work to flip school board seats so that better decisions are made by leadership. You can reach them at momsforliberty.org. And I would just recommend that, boom, if you want a starting point, this is the starting point. Join a Moms for Liberty group or start one in your area if there isn't one, and they will resource you and give you tools, resources, and training to start to engage with your local school district. Also, if you have a story to tell to expose this nonsense, I want to point you to another great partner of ours, Parents Defending Education. We had Nikki Neely on our podcast number 13. And again, you need to listen to podcast number 13. They have resources and tools and a way to expose what's happening in the schools to tell the story so the parents and kids know what's going on so they can defend themselves against this stuff. Those are two quick, easy things, easy ways to get involved and begin to show up and fight for the safety and well-being of your kids. Join or start a Moms for Liberty group. Listen to podcast number 19 with Tiffany Justice. It's really, really good and informative. Or connect with Parents Defending Education. And I would recommend you do both, but connect with Parents Defending Education. Listen to podcast number 13 with Nikki Neely, and then get connected with their organization at defendinged.com. defendinged.com. All right, I'm going to leave you there because I want to leave you with a couple of tools so that you feel empowered to do something. But stay tuned for part 2 of this series on education, where we're going to talk about the war against parents. And we're going to talk more specifically about several other things that you can do to engage in this process of keeping your kids safe in school and making sure that they're getting education and not indoctrination. We're going to go into depth in that. And in our next episode, we're going to talk about how you make the decision on whether to send your child to a public or private or religious school, or if you make the decision to homeschool. These decisions, in fact, that decision of what you're going to do with your kids with respect to their education is going to have a direct effect on their future, on the direction of their lives. And it's a decision that needs to be made fully informed. So we've kind of unpacked a whole bunch of stuff that's happening with our kids, the war on our kids in our school every single day. Next time, we're going to connect you with the war on parents and the specific things that you can do to make the decision on what to do with your kids and their school and educational experience. So stay tuned for part 2 next week. And get engaged. In the meantime, get engaged with Moms for Liberty or Parents Defending Education and start to enter the fight. Hey, until next time, can't wait for part 2 on this one. We'll see you next week. God bless you.